Good evening. I'm Nick Potter, Director of Community Relations and Development for the Pueblo City County Library District. Welcome to our first ever virtual Booklovers Ball. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2020 All Pueblo Reads Booklovers Ball. Normally, we would have a beautifully decorated Rawlings Library as our host venue, but the current pandemic prevents us from gathering normally. It is my pleasure to welcome you as we broadcast live from the Pueblo West Library and host you virtually this evening. Since March, I think we have all gotten pretty used to virtual events. However, they are still a new concept for all of us. This evening, we designed a virtual event that should be simple to access and easy to interact with. This year, we implemented the Booklovers Ball in a box and provided each of you with some materials to create a great at-home event. I hope you have created a beautiful home space, complete with wine, dessert, and of course, a centerpiece to set the mood. After you visited the event website and clicked the play button, you are ready to view and enjoy this evening's program. Here are a couple of notes so you can fully enjoy tonight's virtual event. First, you can pause the live program at any point in the event. Just click the pause icon on the bottom left of the screen. If you pause the program, please be aware that you are delayed on the live video. You can also submit comments or questions to the author. If you have a YouTube account, simply add a comment. If you do not have a YouTube account, you can enter your question on the web page itself. Now, be sure to pour yourself a glass of wine, have your dessert plated, light the candle in your centerpiece carefully, and enjoy. And if you have a second, please take a picture of the home event space that you've created and post it on Pueblo Library's Facebook or Instagram pages. Tonight we will celebrate literacy and lifelong learning. The Booklovers Ball and author presentation is a culmination of events as part of All Pueblo Reads. This year's All Pueblo Reads was completely virtual and hosted more than 120 events. The Library District worked to develop an All Pueblo Reads that reflects our needs currently and developed curriculum for online learning, virtual exhibits, and events for school-age children, and ensured that this literary event was not stopped by our current pandemic. The mission of All Pueblo Reads is to get everyone in Pueblo County reading and discussing one book at the same time. The 2020 selection is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. Mr. O'Brien is joining us this evening from his home in Austin, Texas, so we can have a conversation about his award-winning novel. This event is a fundraiser for the Pueblo Library Foundation and allows the library to further deliver its mission to the community. This evening is possible because of supporters like you and our generous All Pueblo Reads sponsors. Please allow me to thank the generous individuals and businesses that supported the 2020 All Pueblo Reads. At the platinum level, the National Endowment for the Arts Big Read Grant, Bank of the San Juans, Black Hills Energy, H.W. Houston Construction, Solid Earth Civil Constructors, Anderson Mason Dell Architects, HBM Architects. Sponsors at the gold level include the Ken and Gayla White Family Foundation, Big Bear Wine and Liquor, and Pueblo Rotary 43 Foundation. Sponsors at the silver level include Target, Benefits Broker, and Credit Union Community Fund of the Pikes Peak Community Foundation, City of Pueblo, Pueblo City Council, Legacy Bank, Parkview Medical Center, and Security Service Investment Group. And sponsors at the bronze level, Angelus Chapel Mortuaries, Avondale, Boone, and Pueblo County Veterans Foundation, Colorado Building Maintenance, Hub International, Mr. Bart Miller, Pets and Friends Animal Hospital, Rocky Mountain PBS, Southern Colorado Clinic Pediatrics, and American Legion Post 2. Thank you to our generous sponsors. I hope that you will all give them a virtual round of applause because you have all collectively made this evening already a truly great success. Thank you. Tonight we are here to celebrate the Pueblo City Library District's, tonight we are here to celebrate the Pueblo City Library District. Mr. John Walker has been at the helm of PCCLD for 16 years, and during that time, he has led the library to become the amazing organization it is today. This year has probably been one of the most unique and challenging years that most of us have experienced, and we can all be thankful that John is leading the Pueblo Library District during these uncertain times. I would like to welcome John to the event and provide an address about this year's All Pueblo Reads project. John?
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for this very special event. My name is John Walker. It is my honor to serve as the Executive Director of the Pueblo City County Library. Welcome to our 13th annual All Pueblo Reads Booklovers Author Program. This year's book selection is The Things They Carry by Tim O'Brien. It is an important work about American soldiers in the Vietnam War. Of course, this year's All Pueblos Reads author event is different. We are holding this evening's program virtually and online. This is out of respect for the current need to safely distance ourselves from one another while still celebrating the art of writing and a great book. Let's consider for a moment. Tens of thousands of Americans have died. Many more thousands have been incapacitated by the events. There is civil unrest across the nation. American politics are notably divisive, and very many will carry with themselves the very personal and profound impact of events from this challenging and life-changing period for the remainder of their lives. Many, many individuals' lives will forever be impacted. This is America today, in the midst of a pandemic and significant social and political unrest. It also was America 50 years ago, in the midst of its war in Vietnam. Of course, there are many differences between these two periods of time. America during today's COVID-19 public health crisis is unique. America during the Vietnam War was unique. And yet both are periods of national and personal travail and the search for something better. There may be other parallels too. Just so, this year's All Pueblo Reads book, The Things They Carry, provides very personal insights into America's war in Vietnam for those individuals who were directly impacted by it 1/2 century ago. I am proud of this book. I'm proud that it was selected for this year's All Pueblo Reads. I have an even greater sense of appreciation that we are able to welcome the author of this fine book here tonight. Tonight should prove to be a thought-provoking and reflective evening. Again, thank you for being part of this very special program. I will now hand over our virtual podium to the library's Director of Community Relations, Nick Potter. Nick will introduce this year's All Pueblo Reads author.
Thank you, John. Your leadership is ensuring that the Pueblo Library District thrives and provides Pueblo County with the best possible public library experience, now and into the future. Now for our featured presentation. Each year, PCCLD, through the All Pueblo Reads project, features a piece of literature and brings an author to promote dialogue across cultural, generational, and socioeconomic lines. This is the 16th year of All Pueblo Reads and the 13th annual Booklovers Ball. This year is part of a National Endowment for the Arts Big Read grant. The selected book for 2020 is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. We are pleased to virtually host Mr. O'Brien and look forward to hearing from him and receiving insights into his literature. Before Tim O'Brien was drafted into the Army, he had what some would consider an all-American childhood. He was born and raised in Minnesota. His mother was an elementary school teacher. his father an insurance salesman and sailor in World War II. O'Brien played Little League, dabbled in magic tricks, and spent much of his youth in the county library daydreaming about such characters as Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. In college, O'Brien received good grades and became student body president. Occasionally, he'd attend peace vigils and protests against the ongoing war in Vietnam. He graduated in 1968 with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and thought of becoming a writer. He once recalled in an interview that, quote, "Even getting on the plane for boot camp, I couldn't believe any of it was happening to me, someone who hated Boy Scouts and bugs and rifles." O'Brien spent his tour of duty from 1969 to 1970 as a foot soldier with the 5th Battalion, 46th Infantry in Quang Ngai Province. For some of that time, he was stationed in My Lai, just 1 year after the infamous My Lai massacre. He was given a Purple Heart when he was hit with shrapnel in a grenade attack. His first published writing about his war experiences came in the form of a memoir called If I Die in a Combat Zone, Box Me Up and Ship Me Home, published in 1973 during his graduate studies in government at Harvard University. Soon after, he took a position for a year as a national affairs reporter for the Washington Post, then turned full-time to writing books. O'Brien published The Things They Carried in 1990. 2020 is the 30th year anniversary of the publishing of the book. His many accolades include a Guggenheim Fellowship, a National Book Award, an award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and 2 National Endowment for the Arts Fellowships. Mr. O'Brien, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This year, we have celebrated veterans, stories of valor, and the Vietnamese culture. I am so excited to hear from you and hear your insights on the things they carried and topics discussed within the book. And viewers, before Mr. O'Brien begins, remember, you can add your questions in the dialogue box below the video. Mr. O'Brien, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you. Well, first, I want to say thanks to the people of Pueblo, a place I had hoped to visit during before the pandemic had occurred, and I really regret not being there. But I do want to express my gratitude to Pueblo for choosing The Things They Carried for your community Big Read program. I'm very, very grateful. Above anything, a writer wishes to have his or her work read by people. And it's gratifying to know that my book has found its way to Pueblo, Colorado. I want to open by just saying a few words about libraries, since this library is sponsoring my event tonight. I grew up in a small town in southern Minnesota, population about 8,000. And in our town, we were blessed by having one of those old Carnegie libraries that used to dot the whole country. The library in my hometown was built sometime in the 1880s, 1890s, somewhere in there. It showed its age, but it was a place of sanctuary and refuge for a kid who loved books and actually loved the smell of a library, just the feel of a library, the odor of paper and glue and ink, that kind of musty library smell that instantly put me at peace in the world. I spent hours and hours reading books in that library, first in the juvenile or kids section. I remember reading a book in the Nobles County Library called Busy Timmy. It was a picture book of a kid named Timmy, which was my name when I was young. And I was astonished that the author of this book knew so much about me. I could tie my shoes. I could walk to school all by myself. He knew my whole life story. I was amazed at the book. As I grew older, I graduated into Tom Sawyer, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and a whole bunch of other books, ranging from Faulkner to Hemingway to Minnesota native, Scott Fitzgerald. The library meant the world to me, and I sometimes wonder if without that library in my hometown, if I would have turned into a writer or not. It seems improbable in some ways, because it was in that library that I became fascinated not just with books, not just with stories, but with the sound of language, how language sentences were put together, and didn't really ever study writing in my life, but rather learned writing through reading a whole bunch of good literature, and some not so good literature. I learned what not to do as well. In any case, I want to have say a word in support of the Pueblo Library, partly as a thank you, but partly to remind everybody who's listening tonight or tuned into this, whatever you call this, podcast, I'm not sure what you call it, but to keep supporting your library. Especially in hard economic times, libraries become more and more and more important as books get more and more expensive. When people are out of work, it's hard to buy a book instead of groceries. So do continue to support your library. That's why I'm here tonight. I love libraries. It's difficult to talk about the things they carried, as it would be difficult to talk about any book. You can't summarize or paraphrase a book in 40, 30 minutes, whatever time I will be spending before taking questions. So what I thought I would do, instead of talking directly about the things they carried, is try to talk to you about it indirectly, and let what I have to say stand as a kind of background for the book. In a couple of cases, I will be explicitly referring to the book, but I want to try coming at it instead through a back door. You can always read the book, so why should I describe it for you? The Things They Carried is a work of fiction, and it's easy to forget that, I know, when you read the book, because it reads something like a memoir. I intended it that way. I wanted the book to feel as real as you're reading it as any memoir or work of nonfiction that you would read. I have recently published in the last, the paperback just recently came out, in fact, a new book called Dad's Maybe Book. I'm an older father. I had my first child at age 56 and my next child at the age of 58. And the book is about, it's kind of a memoir, a story of my life, but as it's told to my own children, who may never really know me, or so I thought back when I started the book. Hearts go still, life is fragile. I was old. I'm now 74 with two teenage sons. And I wanted them to know something about their dad. Hence, I wrote this book. Well, one of the chapters of this book deals with the things they carried. And that's the chapter I want to just try to talk to you about right now. The first little story I want to tell you, in the hope that it'll illuminate one of the important chapters in the things they carried. When my younger son, Tad, I'll show you a picture of him here so you know who I'm talking about, or I'll try to show it. That's Tad when he was 4 years old. He's now 15. When he was 4 years old, I caught Tad in a bathroom peeing into a wastebasket. And not just a wastebasket, but a wire mesh wastebasket. And not just a wire mesh wastebasket, but a wire mesh wastebasket situated on a freshly carpeted bathroom floor. Why we did this, I have no idea. It was my idea, unfortunately. I don't know why I did it. My wife warned me it was a stupid thing to do. So I walk into the bathroom and there is Tad peeing into a wastebasket. I spoke to him earnestly, you could say. You could say I spoke sharply. So sharply that it kind of paralyzed the boy. He began to move away from the wastebasket back toward the toilet, but only made it halfway and stood paralyzed as I kept saying to him, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this?" He was potty trained. He knew better. And I said it maybe too sharply. In any case, my wife overheard this, came into the bathroom, and she took over the disciplining duties and the cleanup duty while I retreated to my office where I am right now, kind of muttering to myself. This kid is a great kid, and why he would do such a thing to this day is way beyond me. So I sat at my desk trying to write, but not writing a word, just muttering to myself, still a little bit angry. After an hour or so, little Tad, the little 4-year-old whose picture I just showed you, came toddling into my office. And the boy looked at me with this kind of combination of fear and remorse. After a moment, he said to me, "Daddy, I have 2 heads." I said, "What?" And he said, "I have 2 heads." And I said, "What?" "You asked why I did it," Tad said. "It's because I have 2 heads. One head told me, 'Daddy won't like this.' The other head said, 'This is going to be fun.'" Well, a number of thoughts came to me in a rush. My son might one day become a psychiatrist or might one day need one. My son, I realized by the sophistication of that comment, was not the budding juvenile delinquent that I had imagined only a few minutes earlier, maybe a budding serial killer. He was a smart kid to say such a thing. In any case, that evening, I moved with a kind of newfound respect into the boy's bedroom, where I would tell them bedtime stories each night. I'm a writer, and I didn't read them stories all the time. I mostly just made up my own for them. And that night, I began a bedtime story for those 2 little boys, one of them age 4, the other age 6, by saying, "Once upon a time, I actually knew somebody with 2 heads." "Really?" said Tad. "What was his name?" "His name was Daddy," I said. Both Tad and his older brother, Timmy, looked at my neck as if inspecting it for like a head stump that had once grown there. "You really had 2 heads," said Timmy. "I did," I said. "Maybe more than 2. And then for the next, 20, 25 minutes, I told my sons the story of what had occurred to me in the summer of 1968, the summer I was drafted, the summer I became a soldier. In a way, I was telling them a somewhat sanitized, cleaned up version of a chapter in the things they carried called On the Rainy River. "One of my heads," I told the boys, "located, let's say, above my right shoulder, was fiercely patriotic, loved its country, respected authority, respected tradition, and believed in all those great American values such as duty and sacrifice and service to one's nation. The other head, located over the other shoulder, also believed in those things, but at the same time found itself opposed to the war in Vietnam. I wanted nothing to do with it. Not the killing part, and even more certainly, not the dying part. I was 21 years old. I was terrified. And through the summer of 1968, after receiving my draft notice, those two heads endlessly confronted each other all summer long as I waited to go into the Army. The heads would mock me, they would challenge me, debate, taunt, cuss, invoke the name of LBJ, the name of Richard Nixon, Jane Fonda, Abby Hoffman, Patrick Henry, and Donald Duck. At times, those two heads spoke quietly and rationally, but other times, those heads screamed at each other the most outlandish obscenities, much as people were screaming their black and white platitudes all across our republic during that red-hot summer of 1968. Hawks at the throats of doves. Well, at this point, of course, both Tad and Timmy were sound asleep, dreaming their 4-year-old and 6-year-old dreams. And yet, for a long, long time, I lay there in the Texas dark, flanked by these two precious little boys, still telling that story to myself. Or should I say, retelling it, as I've been doing now for 50-some years. Not aloud, not anymore, but telling it now in my thoughts, in my memory. Even now, all these decades later, those two heads are still yapping away. Now and then, the first head will score a sterile rhetorical victory. Other times, the other head will win. Sometimes one head might say, "What a coward you were for going to that war." And the other head will shake itself and say, "You did what your country asked you to do." And the first head will laugh and say, "Oh, right. And what if your country told you to blow up Toronto tomorrow, to go kill Canadians? Would you do it?" And the other head will say, "Hey, that would never happen. We live in a good and great country, a country that would never issue such an order." And the other head will say, "Huh? What about My Lai? What about the American Indian? What about Jim Crow laws? What about weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist?" And the other head will say, "Hey, come on. Everybody makes mistakes." And the first head will say, "Exactly my point." And on and on and on. Eventually, even now, 5 decades after that war ended for me, one of the heads will finally say, "Come on, man, let's get some sleep." And finally, at 2 or 3 a.m., I'll doze off. Well, it strikes me tonight, in speaking to you, that virtually everyone will, at some point in his or her life, also carry more than one head. Should I marry Bill or should I marry Phil? Or should I dump them both and marry Jill? Should I keep plugging away at this hateful job? Or should I seek a better future in Tahiti? Should I go to graduate school or husk corn in Nebraska? Part of being an adult, part of being human, as opposed to, say, being a chipmunk, is that at certain points in our lives, we will all carry on our shoulders at least 2 and sometimes more than 2 heads. 2 heads can be a problem. They can lead to late night second guessing, wee hour remorse, endless speculation about what could have been or should have been. In any case, some of you may one day find yourselves, in some decades still to come, lying in bed with your own children, revisiting a story about a moral choice you made or failed to make, or would make differently. In the things they carried, I tried to portray in the chapter called On the Rainy River the moral confusion that I felt as a 20-year-old kid who had been drafted to fight in a war that I thought was wrong. What do? You say no to your country? Well, I loved my country, and I didn't want to say no. At the same time, I loved my conscience, and I didn't want to say no to my own conscience. I felt so trapped that summer of 1968, trapped in a kind of global entanglement, not knowing what to do with my own body. Should I send my body to Canada, or should I send it off to a war to kill and maybe to die? Those two heads are still with me, as I mentioned, all these years later, and I still wrestle with that moral choice. I did end up going to Vietnam. I can't say that it was a rational decision. It was more like a kind of giving up or a kind of surrender. One day, my dad came into my bedroom and said, "Get your suitcase." We got in the car. He drove me to the bus depot, and I went off essentially to the war, first to boot camp, then to advanced infantry training, and then to Vietnam. To carry two heads through life, as I've done, and however burdensome it may be, however dispiriting, may help on some occasions to avoid the soul-killing, people-killing problem of absolutism. If you have two heads, nothing much is absolute. Muhammad Atta, the hijacker and pilot of one of those airliners that struck the World Trade Center, he had but one head, a bonehead at that, an absolutist of the most consummate and deadly sort. Atta thought he knew the final and definitive and absolute truth of things, a truth worth dying for and a truth worth killing for. Let us not, let me not, and you not, and my children not commit the same one-headed sin of vanity and narcissism and complacency and self-righteousness and self-congratulation and bullyism and demagoguery and simple-minded black and white, I'm right and you're wrong declarations about the truth of things. After the events of recent years, I've come to fear that our own country, as much as any other country, is endangered by self-centered, bullying, absolutist rhetoric from all political parts of our constellation in America, not from one. It seems to surround me every time I turn on the television set and happen upon some news channel. One of the lessons of the things they carried, maybe the biggest lesson of it all, was how confusing that war was, how uncertain I was, how ambiguous everything seemed. Who was your friend? Who was your enemy? How could you tell the difference? How do you shoot back at a landmine? Blows you up, blows off your legs, and you can't shoot back like in all the old John Wayne war movies? Who do you trust? Even among your own fellow soldiers, who do you trust? Some of them would fall asleep on guard, even though they were your buddies, you get angry. But mainly the confusion was inside my own head. As I walked through that war, doing my best to try to stay alive. It was tough doing it when you didn't like Boy Scouts and didn't like camping out and didn't like mosquitoes and bugs and all the rest. Somehow I made it through the war and came home, still wearing those two heads, just like my son Tad, in that bathroom story I told you. I want to switch gears for a second now. I'm trying to keep track of the time. What I want to do next is read just a very, very short piece of the things they carried, and then talk a little bit about the origins of the piece, where it came from, why I wrote the chapter, and what I was hoping to accomplish with the chapter. I chose a really short one. It's called Ambush. When she was 9, my daughter Kathleen asked if I'd ever killed anyone. She knew about the war. She knew I'd been a soldier. "You keep writing these war stories," she said, "so I guess you must have killed somebody." It was a difficult moment, but I did what seemed right, which was to say, of course not, and then to take her onto my lap and just hold her for a while. Someday, I hope, she'll ask again. But here, right now, I want to pretend she's a grown-up. I want to tell her exactly what happened, or what I remember happening. And then I want to say to her that as a little girl, she was absolutely right. This is why I keep telling war stories. He was a short, slender young man of about 20. I was afraid of him, afraid of something. And as he passed me on the trail, I threw a grenade that landed at his feet and killed him. Or to go back, shortly after midnight, we moved into the ambush site outside a little village called Mike. The whole platoon was there, maybe 30 of us, spread out in the dense brush along the trail. And for 5 hours that night, nothing at all happened. We were working in 2-man teams, one man on guard while the other slept, switching off every 2 hours. And I remember it was still dark when my friend Kiowa shook me awake for the final watch. The night was foggy and hot. For the first few moments, I felt lost, not sure about directions, groping for my helmet and my weapon. I reached out and found 3 grenades and lined them up in front of me for quick throwing. And then, for maybe half an hour, I kneeled there in the dark and waited. Very gradually, in tiny slivers, dawn began to break through the morning fog. And from my position in the brush, I could see 10 or 15 meters up the trail. The mosquitoes were fierce. I remember slapping at them, wondering if I should wake up Kyle and ask for some repellent, then thinking that was a bad idea. And then looking up and seeing the young man come out of the morning fog. He wore black clothing and rubber sandals and a gray ammunition belt. His shoulders were slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side as if listening for something. He seemed at ease. He carried his weapon in one hand, muzzle down, moving without any hurry up the center of the trail. There was no sound at all, none that I can remember. And in a way, he was part of the morning fog, or part of my own imagination. But there was also the reality of what was happening in my stomach. I had already pulled the pin on a grenade. I had come up to a crouch. It was entirely automatic. I did not hate the young man. I did not see him as the enemy. I did not ponder issues of morality, politics, or military duty. I crouched and kept my head low. I tried to swallow whatever was rising from my stomach, which tasted like lemonade, something fruity and sour. There were no thoughts about killing. That grenade was to make him go away, just evaporate. And I leaned back and felt my head go empty, and then felt it fill up again. I had already thrown the grenade before telling myself to throw it. It was gone. The brush was thick, and I had to lob it high, not aiming. And I remember that grenade seeming to freeze above me for an instant, as if a camera had clicked. And I remember ducking down and holding my breath and seeing little wisps of fog rise from the earth. The grenade bounced once and rolled across the trail. I did not hear it, but there must have been a sound, because the young man dropped his weapon and began to run. Just 2 or 3 quick steps. Then he stopped, turned to his right, glanced down at the grenade, and tried to cover his head, but never did. It occurred to me then that he was about to die. I wanted to warn him. The grenade made a popping noise. Not soft, but not loud either, not what you'd expect. And there was a puff of dust and smoke, a small white puff. And the young man seemed to jerk upward, as if pulled by invisible wires. He fell on his back. His rubber sandals had been blown off. He lay at the center of the trail, his right leg bent beneath him, his one eye shut, his other eye a huge star-shaped hole. For me, it was not a matter of live or die. I was in no real danger. Almost certainly, the young man would have passed me by, and it will always be that way. Later, I remember my friend Kiowa tried to tell me that the man would have died anyway. He told me it was a good kill. He told me I was a soldier and this was a war. He told me I should shape up and stop staring and ask myself what the dead man would have done if things were reversed. But you see, none of that mattered. The words were way too complicated. All I could do was gape at the fact of the young man's body. Even now, more than 50 years later, I haven't finished sorting it out. Sometimes I forgive myself. Other times I don't. In the ordinary hours of life, I try not to dwell on it. But now and then, when I'm reading a newspaper or just sitting alone in a room, I'll look up and see the young man step out of the morning fog. I'll watch him walk toward me, his shoulders slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side, and he'll pass within a few yards of me and suddenly smile at some secret thought, and then continue up the trail to where it bends back into the morning fog. Why do I choose this chapter to focus on for the rest of my speaking time? Well, first, it's a chapter in which a single human death, a slim, dainty, young Vietnamese man, boy, really, a single death is lingered over for 6 pages. It's observed in detail. And it's not just summarized by the way of the kind of statistics that you'll read in a newspaper or you'll hear about on CNN. 6 guys killed in Baghdad today. That's about all you hear. They're dead, and there were 6 of them. And at least in this story, you get a little glimpse of both the killer and the person killed. That lemonade taste in the back of my throat. The mosquitoes all around me. The desire to warn someone that you'd just thrown a grenade at. The second reason I selected this chapter, beyond just focusing on at least one human death and a little bit of detail, the second reason is the chapter is not true, at least not in the literal sense. For example, the character of Kathleen, the daughter, does not exist. I have no daughter, never did. In fact, up until 17 years ago, I had no children at all. On top of that, there was no hand grenade, no Kiowa, no trail junction, no morning fog, no star-shaped hole. All those details are the product of a novelist's imagination. But in another more important sense, that story is completely and absolutely true. As a soldier, more than 50 years ago, I participated in dozens of such ambushes during my time in Vietnam. I stared at dozens of corpses. And so this story is a way of collapsing a whole year at war into a single night, single death. All those dead people collapsed inside a single dead Vietnamese boy. My hope, of course, is that the reader might feel at least a little of what I felt. I felt nothing about this is an enemy, and I felt no sense of valor, and I said no sense of I'm serving my country. All I felt was I'm alive and he's dead. And I just couldn't stop staring. I've got to add, though, that there was one particular real-life ambush that is the basis for the story. And one of the reasons I wrote it, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, dark out. We were encamped on a hill. Our company commander woke up our company, about 100 of us, and we walked through the Vietnam dark to a small village about 2 hours away. It was a 2-hour blundering walk through complete blackness. When we arrived at the village, 3 of our platoons surrounded it on three sides. And the last platoon, which included headquarters company, I was the RTO for our company commander, the radio guy. We lined up along a paddy dike. And the idea was that at full light, when dawn broke, these 3 platoons would move through the village and press the enemy out of the village into a rice paddy where we, the guys I was with, were supposed to gun them down. Well, these operations never worked. We were heard coming from miles away. The intelligence was wrong. They never worked, except this night. As clearly as I can see my computer screen in front of me, I can see dawn beginning to break over this rice paddy in front of me. The village is off this way. And the kind of a purpley violet glow right over the edge of the horizon. It slowly turned rosy and then kind of yellowish as the sun came up. That's when the platoons began moving through the village. And sure enough, there were 3 enemy silhouettes that suddenly appeared directly in front of me, maybe, I don't know, 15 yards away. And I, along with everybody with me, about 30 of us, opened up with everything we had. Machine guns, M16 rifles, Claymore anti-personnel mines, hand grenades, M79 grenade launchers, everything that the arsenals at Hartford delivered to us as soldiers, we unleashed on these three silhouettes about 15 yards away. When full dawn came, only one body lay there. We were bad shots, among a lot of other things. It's amazing what fear will do to you. You just don't aim straight. But there was one corpse lying out in that rice paddy. Unlike the character in my story, I didn't go look at that guy. By that point in my tour of Vietnam, I'd seen, way too many corpses already. I didn't want to look at another one. But I certainly did feel an overwhelming crush of guilt and horror. Because you see, I will never know if a bullet from my weapon killed that young man out in that rice paddy. War's chaotic, a lot of noise, a lot of fear. Very rarely in Vietnam did I ever aim at anything. There was very rarely anything to aim at. I just sprayed fire with my eyes closed. And yet, in the story I just read to you, that comes from the things they carried, I can assume responsibility for the death that I witnessed all around me, including that slim, dainty young man. After all, I was there. I was a soldier. I pulled the trigger. And in this story, I can put a face on all that horror I witnessed, all those faceless dead bodies. And in this story, I can confront my own complicity in that horror. The way soldiers throughout all the eons of history must ultimately take responsibility for doing what they did. In a way, this story was meant to make me feel again, to feel what I had felt as I pulled the trigger on that weapon. Granted, the details in the story are invented, and they're not true in a literal way. But this story is true to my nightmares and to my emotions all these years later, when I'm sitting alone in a room, reading a newspaper, and when I sometimes look up and find myself back in Vietnam, out on a late night ambush. Thank you. That concludes my presentation, and Nick is going to help me with whatever comments or questions you might have. Thank you all for listening.
Mr. O'Brien, thank you so much for your heartfelt, honest, and just powerful presentation. At this time, we do have a few questions that have been submitted through our online forum from our audience. Our first question comes from Marissa Stoller. And Marissa first says, thank you so much for being with us virtually today,
welcome.
Mr. O'Brien. And then her question is, one of the things I particularly enjoyed about your book was the specific chapters about the things they carried and the zoom between the physical items and the more metaphorical. I was curious if you thought the things soldiers carry today are the same as some of the things soldiers carried in the Vietnam War. Obviously, radios no longer weigh 25 pounds, but I would think photos of loved ones and feelings of responsibility for the soldiers under them and perhaps ghosts might be similar.
Well, it's a great question. There's a couple of ways I can answer it. One is to tell you that I receive a boatload of letters and have received them over the years from guys in the Middle East, our soldiers there, and a couple of cases from women who were soldiers, either in Afghanistan or in Iraq. And the things they carried is one of the things they carry, which is an odd kind of circular thing, where a book called The Things They Carried end up being one of the things that is carried by the soldiers. The reason it's carried is because there are so many similarities between my experience and what our modern soldiers are going through. It's a civil war over there, just as mine was. One of the main killers in my war was landmines, and it's one of the main killers. They call them IEDs now, improvised explosive devices, but they're the same thing. They're landmines and booby-trapped artillery rounds. The fear of those things is carried by guys in the Middle East today and women, just as it was carried back during my war. You can't shoot back and kill a landmine. It's already dead. It's made of plastic and metal, explosives. It just kills you. And as a result, a kind of frustration begins to build up inside of you, a kind of bitterness. It's not like the John Wayne movies we all watched when my generation was young, kind of macho, charging enemy bunkers and so on. Instead, you die just walking. It could just as well happen in the way into a Walmart today. You just take a step and you're dead, or your legs are gone. That's similar. The only really huge difference between my war and the modern wars is what the person who wrote the question mentioned. The technology has gotten substantially better. Radios are lighter, weapons are lighter, they're more efficient, and so on. But the biggest difference really is that our army today is not an army primarily composed of draftees. These are volunteers today. And in my army, the bulk of the men I served with had been drafted. They didn't necessarily want to be there, and I doubt they would have volunteered. But they went because it felt like an obligation, the same reason I finally ended up going myself. I felt obliged to do what my country wanted me to do, even if I thought it was wrong. So yeah, soldiers still carry helmets, they still carry flak jackets, they still carry machine guns, mortars, rifles, pistols, all the stuff we carried, bandoliers of ammunition. I'm a little guy. I'm about 5'7", and back then I weighed like 139, 40 pounds. And I was carrying 85 to 90 pounds with me every day, including that 25-pound radio on my back. The sense of fatigue is similar. It's a kind of a trivial little detail, but it's one of those dirty little secrets of warfare, is you're always exhausted. Physically exhausted, yeah, from the weight you're carrying, but exhausted because you haven't slept all night. You're on guard. You don't just go to sleep and let them come kill you. You sit at your foxhole and stare out into the black for half the night. And then you get up after 3 hours of sleep and you do it all over again, marching with all that weight. Well, when you do that and you're that tired and that worn down, even if you're 21 years old and in great shape, you begin to lose your judgment. You start throwing stuff away. One too many hand grenades are too heavy, toss it into the bush. Unload that canteen of water, toss it away, drink it and throw it. And when you begin to lose your judgment, you can get in really big trouble. So in any case, the similarities far outweigh the differences between my war and the wars that are going on in the Middle East.
So our second question comes from a viewer named Reg S. And the first thing she wants to do is welcome you and thank you for joining us in Pueblo this evening. And she asks, how do we balance patriotism while also fighting the injustices that this country perpetuates? And also, what advice do you have for surviving this new era of civil unrest?
I'm the last guy you should be asking for advice. I'm as confused as everybody is. I feel like we're sort of in a way back in a war, but this time I'm not alone. Everybody in the country is there with me during this pandemic and all the craziness erupting all around us. I alluded to it in my two-headed talk. I alluded to bullyism and absolutism, narcissism, self-congratulation, all the stuff that we're seeing come out of those TV sets at us day and night. And I don't have any advice. I just yell at my TV set until it yells back at me that I have none. I guess the only thing I tell myself is that I got through Vietnam simply by enduring. I just kept humping. I didn't fall down. I didn't quit. I didn't shoot myself in the foot to get out of the war. I just kept going. And there's something to be said for just humping. That's a phrase that meant walk in Vietnam. We called it humping. And with that kind of endurance, I think is what we kind of need as a country right now. We've got to just sort of try to keep going with some decency and civility, even though all around us is indecency and incivility. But just keep humping. Try to be nice to the people around you. Wear your mask. Don't kill other people just because you want your freedom. Don't at the grocery store. Try to not to like touch me anymore. I don't like when people don't have masks on and kind of tap me on the shoulder and ask me where the Kellogg's cornflakes are. Just be nice.
Thank you for that. You know, as the moderator for this, it was really hard to recover from my chuckle that you gave me with that one. So you're keeping me on my toes.
Good.
So our next question, Mr. O'Brien, asks, in our present climate, we see many books and movies about World War I and World War II, but there aren't as many books about the Vietnam War. Why do you think Vietnam is not featured as much as the two world wars?
Well, the person who asked that question, I think, is right. And I think I know the answer. We lost the war. Not many veterans want to admit it. They'll say the media lost the war, or the flower children lost the war, or the peace lovers lost the war. But my company in Vietnam, we suffered many more casualties than we inflicted on anybody. I don't think that's true with all companies, but it was true in my case. But in any case, we left the field of battle and came home, and the people we were fighting took over the country. That looks a lot like winning to me for them, and a little bit like losing for us. It's an unpopular war. It's full of a lot of bad memories for a lot of the soldiers who went there, but also bad memories for their wives and their lovers and their children. Those same soldiers are now my age. They go silent at the dinner table. They sometimes go kind of blank as they retreat in memory back to 50 years ago. And I think the reason that so many books that I find myself reading that are about war are World War I or World War II, both of which we had the great good fortune to win, pretty conspicuously win. That's what Armistice Day is about, the end of World War I. That's what, VE Day and VJ Day are about. It's victory. America the triumphant, America to celebrate. And Vietnam, there was very little to celebrate. About 70,000 dead Americans, 3 million dead Vietnamese. That's the lowest possible estimate, 3 million. A good portion of them children, and a good portion of them civilians. In fact, I think the majority civilians. It's hard to write books about something so grim and such a grim part of our country's history that we seem determined to forget. I must admit, I wish I could forget. I just can't. Nor can a lot of my buddies.
And Mr. O'Brien, we have time for one more question. And I'd like to share some of the great comments that people have left that aren't questions, but just, I think, beautiful comments about your words and about you being here in Pueblo. So first, the question that we received was that you've been quoted as saying that stories can save us. Can you speak as to why you feel this way, and what do you mean by this?
In my own case, stories can save us means I had to salvage something out of the wreckage that was my memories of Vietnam. And what I did was I dove into the wreckage and brought up these stories that I've written in the hope that they'll make others feel some of the emotions that go through a soldier in a time of great peril, but not just a soldier, just a human being, a scared to death 21-year-old kid who doesn't want to die and yet wants to do what he can to, serve his country, do what his country wants him to do, even if he doesn't want to do it. And to feel that sense of confusion that I felt the whole time in Vietnam, where the confusion about who I am, who is Tim O'Brien? I thought I was a nice, decent, peace-loving, gentle guy. But I learned otherwise in Vietnam, that there's an aspect to my personality and probably the human animal that's dark and capable of incredible violence. And I did it in Vietnam. It was either do it or die, and I did. I've heard similar stories come out of, I've read in Primo Levi and anecdotes and stories coming out of concentration camps during World War II, where in order to survive, you've got to harden yourself to an incredible degree, and I did. But I managed to salvage something good about myself as well. A kind of newfound respect for peace that I never really had before a war, a love of peace. Peace is a shy thing. It doesn't brag about itself. We're at peace right now. At least I am in my house, and I assume you are. Nobody's shooting at me. But I didn't think about that until I just said it. Whereas if you're in a war, it's a braggart. It's noisy. It's all around you, chaotic, and it's just yelling in your ears all the time. And to have been in a war and come back and find that I now value things I never really valued much before. If you're drinking paddy water full of algae and worms and stuff, you kind of value a cold Coke in a way you never did before. And if you're eating sea rations day and night, that's like eating, I don't know, paper mache. You come to value, a McDonald's burger, little trivial things that you never really thought were very important to you until you don't have them anymore. Well, one of the things I didn't have was peace when I was in Vietnam, and I've come to value it. And that's what I mean by stories can save us. You tell the stories I just finished telling you, you hope that something good has been salvaged from all the bad?
No, I think that's such a great question for us to end on, because really that's the point of this entire program of All Pueblo Reads is we talked earlier today because we presented, or you presented, to some high school and some university and college students. And the whole purpose of this is for you to share your story and your words and your piece of work. And so thank you so much, Mr. O'Brien, for being here.
It was really fun. Thank you.
And I have a few folks that just kind of had some nice things to say. And so our first comment comes from Mr. Wally Rice, and he just wanted to thank you for your service. Our second comment comes from Mona Asquig. She says, "Thank you so much, Tim O'Brien, for your powerful comments."
Thank you.
As well as Reg S, who just wanted to say that your response to your question was beautiful, and thank you.
Thank you.
And so that concludes our evening. And I just really want to say, Mr. O'Brien, thank you so much for joining us. Our community
I just wish I'd been there with you. This is okay doing it on, the internet, but I'd much rather be in Pueblo right now.
Hey, if you ever find yourself in Pueblo, we will treat you right. So after COVID, we invite you back.
Thank you. I'll be there.
But, in all honesty, our community has truly enjoyed your literature during this time. We've been able to experience such warm people who have sacrificed so much to serve our country. And so for our viewers, if you would like to hear more from Mr. O'Brien, or others who would enjoy hearing from him, he will be back on the Pueblo Library's Facebook and YouTube channels tomorrow at 6:30. Within our event page, we also have links to other selections from Tim O'Brien and recordings of all of our events that occurred as part of the 2020 All Pueblo Reads. This concludes our evening. We look forward to seeing you all at the 2020 Booklovers Ball. Thank you for joining us, and have a great evening.